Fellas, when you think of feudal Japan, you're probably imagining its strict warrior culture and military dictatorships. But what you really need to consider is, could it survive the zombie apocalypse? Well, that's what we're going to figure out in today's video, because we'll be playing Warhammer Total War 3 post-zombie outbreak. In this world, 90% of the map is controlled by the undead, and each vampire lord starts the game with dozens of armies full of zombies. By this point, most factions have become extinct, and there's only a handful of resistance groups fighting to survive. We will be playing as the noble Japanese, isolated in the Far East. Our goal is to unify Japan, create a formidable army, and destroy the four main undead factions responsible for the apocalypse. Can we utilize the might of the samurai to restore order to this world, or will we become just another body in the army of the dead? There's only one way to find out, but before we go any further, I have to tell you something. 7 months ago, I began a revolutionary initiative to save the homeless population by getting them horny. It's a long story, and you'll be surprised to hear it didn't work. I failed my fellow man because I left them in the unsavory hands of anime women.
Plop, 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 plop. Get pregnant, get pregnant!
I mean, who's really behind that camera, Alana? For all we know, it's 3 Discord mods in a trench coat. Point is, if you want to do something right, do it yourself. Which is why I partnered with Gamer Subs to take matters into my own hands. Ladies and gentlemen, they made me hot. You may look upon my supple body and think, dear God, science has gone too far. But that's just how committed I am to the cause. And my only other option was to pay an animator to turn me into a gay rat. So count yourself lucky. Long story short, for a limited time we're selling a Reggie shaker cup for all of your drinking needs. I love mine so much I physically consumed it. Now it'll be with me forever in the form of millions of microplastics coursing through my veins. But if that's not your style, we also have a branded hat. This thing is saving me a ton of money on psychiatrists, because instead of spending thousands of dollars to receive a diagnosis, I just wear this hat in public, and everyone implicitly understands that I am mentally ill. I don't want to brag, but this is an excellent value proposition. So I recommend pre-ordering your merch today, or else I might just get desperate. Alright, now back to the video. Here we are in the beautiful fantasy world of pre-anime Japan. My name is Shingen Takeda of the Takeda clan, and I'm a provincial daimyo, which means I spend most of my time exploiting local farmers and beating the ever-living shit out of my neighbors. Some might say it's the perfect life, but there's one problem. We've got way too many Chinese guys. In fact, there's also some Egyptians and even a few furries. Point is, if we want to survive the zombie apocalypse, we're going to need to unify Japan under a singular identity. There are a few options for achieving this, but above all else, I believe in historical accuracy, which is why I'm going to kill everyone, starting with this guy. I'm not necessarily doing this because he's Chinese, though that would be historically accurate. I'm doing it because his goddamn name is 30 pages long, and whenever I select him in the diplomacy screen, it stretches out somewhere into the Atlantic Ocean. You see, when you have a name this long, it dehumanizes you, because people don't even try to remember it. Instead, they just give you terrible nicknames like Dick Stroker and Ass Master. Every Thanksgiving, your grandmother says to you, "Hey, come goblin, pass the gravy," and then she spits in your eye because she doesn't respect you. Gradually, your sense of identity is eroded and you sink into a deep depression before lying down on the highway. I think in light of that nightmarish reality, killing this guy is honestly the nicest thing we could do for him. So we start by taking 2 of his settlements and then setting up an ambush outside his capital. Luckily, he's too busy alphabetizing his names to notice, so he walks right into it. At face value, our army is composed primarily of impoverished rice farmers. However, the enemy army is mostly crows, so I think we've got a chance. Setting up the ambush, I attack the left side with a few units of samurai, and turn the right side into a peasant gangbang. After a few minutes, thousands are dead, and Japan is victorious. I can already feel my ultra-nationalism rising. After that, I spent a few turns culturally assimilating the Tomb Kings by stabbing them repeatedly with a wakizashi. Meanwhile, in Southeast Asia, the first undead overlord Helman Gorst is quickly expanding his empire through the destruction of resistance factions. Once he gets past these French armies, he'll share a maritime border with us, which is really bad. But we don't have time to worry about that, because I just declared war on Tzeentch and I'm taking all of his territory. Also, I've unlocked a new mount, which I definitely know how to ride. The Tzeentchian conflict culminated in one final battle at his northernmost province. Tzeentch armies are usually threatening because of how many ranged units they can field. So to counter this, I've researched and developed matchlock rifles. vehicles. You might not think this is a big deal, but let me give you a choice. You can either get attacked with funny bisexual magic, or if you prefer, I can blow your face off with a black powder musket. I know which one I'd pick. Anyway, the battle got underway, with trebuchets bombarding the enemies and our muskets controlling the skies. Following this up with a full charge, things quickly devolved into a large-scale woodland melee, where I attempt to utilize my complete disregard for casualties to slowly beat our enemies into submission. And just as things were getting interesting, the game crashed. Which leads us to my next point. If you're watching this video and thinking, wow, Japan is very cool, I want to be Japanese. No, you don't. This mod is a direct pipeline to Neo-Luddite terrorism, because it has the approximate stability of a landmine in a blender. It's not a matter of if it'll blow up, it's a matter of how many innocent lives will be caught in the blast. Every time my game crashes, I add 500 words to my manifesto, and whenever it isn't crashing, it's T-posing my commanders, changing the aspect ratio on their portraits, and making them ride their mounts underground. In fact, I couldn't use my general for that entire last battle, because he spawned in on a horse 70 feet in the sky. Couldn't move at all. Point is, I'm willing to be radicalized into bombing a data center just so I can roleplay as the Shogun of Japan. But I don't recommend it. Anyway, after reloading the save, I did the honorable thing and auto-resolved Tzeentch into oblivion. The only people left to resist us now are the Skaven. And now that my commander isn't doing the Skyblock challenge, I'm headed straight for them. I was lucky enough to attack their capital while most of their armies rode at sea, so I only had to kill millions of rats instead of billions. But any battle against the Skaven is and always will be a monumental pain in the ass. Also, we crashed. After exterminating the rats, we controlled most of the country, and I established a defensive alliance with the only other Japanese faction. Now, after hundreds of years of bloodshed, Japan is finally unified under a singular vision, which means we can devote all of our resources to creating the most vile pornography imaginable. This is the samurai way. Also, I guess we should do something about the millions of zombies. In fact, by this point, the undead hordes have completely obliterated French Vietnam, and Helman is now actively extorting us for money. Money which I gladly pay him, because he's the strongest faction in the game, and the endgame crisis hasn't even triggered yet. Up to this point, we've been practicing the isolationist policy of sakoku. In case you're not familiar with this principle, allow me to put it into a hypothetical situation. Your name is John Fortnite. You live in Section 8 housing with your father, who forces you to refer to him as the Shogun, your mother, the Emperor, and approximately 12 to 18 million siblings. One day, an African dandy knocks on your door and asks you for directions to the gas station. You slice him in half with a katana for violating your national sovereignty, and then your father exiles you to live the rest of your life in the backyard for the crime of interacting with a foreigner. This is sakoku, and it has kept us safe up to this point. But once the endgame crisis hits, we won't be able to hide any longer, because all zombie factions will declare war on us and we'll probably die. So to improve our odds of survival, we need to continue expanding and developing our empire. Which leads me to my next point. Taiwan.
I like you, and I want you.
Right now, it's under the control of the Taiwanese Dark Elves, but I'd like to turn it into a military base to train samurai, so let's get to work. I send my navy to Taiwan on a diplomatic mission. I kill the Taiwanese and rename all of their settlements. This is the equivalent of stealing someone's barbecue before scratching off the serial number and repainting it. Basically, foolproof. I also forged alliances with the Filipino High Elves, because with 90% of the world taken over by zombies, it's probably bad policy to keep killing the only survivors. Now that we've got land, military infrastructure, and unmitigated ultra-nationalism, we are easily one of the strongest remaining human factions. So what's our next move? I ask myself this question, and my inner Japanese daimyo screams the answer. Right now, it's controlled by the undead, with a small South Korean resistance led by Lokir Felhart. I sail my navy in that direction to help out. However, before I can get there, I receive terrible news. The endgame crisis just popped, and Helman Gorst is looking at me the same way Jeffrey Dahmer looks at gay black men in the suburbs. So that changed my priorities just a bit. Good luck, South Korea. I'm sure you'll be fine. Our win conditions for this campaign are simple. Destroy the 4 dominant undead factions, and since Helman is right next to us, we may as well start there. At the moment, our main army, led by Shingen, is composed of highly trained samurai and a few riflemen, while our other 2 armies are primarily peasants and a couple of long-range cannons. It's not much, but hopefully it's enough. Landing at Saigon, we quickly capture the settlement, but it turns out we are the wrong type of Asian, because the magical forests of Vietnam are completely uninhabitable to us. So I decide to donate the land to the French resistance in exchange for them joining the war. Our blitzkrieg against the undead was going quite well. We managed to liberate 3 more settlements and sell them back to the French, but our success was short-lived, because after 5 turns of casualties, vampiric attrition, and a low replenishment rate, my army of hardened samurai warriors may as well be an army of femboy twinks, because with a combined 50 health, we're looking awfully submissive and breedable. My conclusion from losing 5,000 men in just a couple turns? Our artillery is trash, and we need anti-cavalry, because our rifles can't do shit when an 1,100-pound horse is tap dancing on their balls. So for attempt 2, I brought in some Naginata samurai and started upgrading our units with Sakura blessings. However, our downfall, as always, was trusting the French, because I accepted a battle to defend their settlement against the undead, but these chalk-eating, window-licking French bastards deployed facing the wrong direction and got slaughtered before I could even show up. Maybe, just maybe, we're on the wrong side of history. Anyway, everyone died and I was back to twiddling my thumbs in the Pacific Ocean. As if that wasn't bad enough, the undead launched a surprise invasion of Taiwan, taking half of the island before I could even react. If Taiwan falls, we lose access to all samurai units, so this is kind of a big deal. I managed to cobble together an army of swordsmen and reinforce it with Ronin from the mainland. This culminates in one final battle for control of the island. We establish a defensive formation and the undead armies wash upon us. For every zombie we kill, 2 seem to take its place. It wasn't until our archers started focus firing the enemy leadership that things started going in our favor. Before long, the battle was over, resulting in a massive victory for mankind, with 6,500 undead casualties. With that taken care of, there's only one thing left to do. Fellas, grab your M16s and jungle heroin, because we're going back to Vietnam. For this second invasion, I adopted the approach of fanning out my armies and attacking Helman on multiple fronts. Then I realized that's stupid as hell. Helman's weakness is that he has to defend all of his fronts, which allows us to instead group up 3 or 4 stacks and overpower him at a singular point. By this point, I've successfully vassalized the French, High Elves, and the Japanese, so I coordinated their armies to distract the undead in the north while I took our navy to the deep south and established a beachhead. It doesn't take long for the locals to come greet us, and I'm sure they're expecting us to instantly capitulate and suck them from behind. But we've got a secret weapon, the Shogun's first samurai. Usually, a singular unit cannot sway the tide of a 10,000-man battle, but this regiment of renown cost 4,000 gold just to recruit, and that's because they're absolutely and completely busted. They have triple the attack of our usual samurai, they're unbreakable, armored, armor-piercing, and they can even deflect projectiles with their swords. Truly, this is Japanese apotheosis. So when I tell you that we attacked 3 undead armies and absolutely crucified them in open combat, you shouldn't be surprised. You also shouldn't be surprised when I explain that it took me 9 hours to do this, because every time I loaded the fight, my game would crash. One of our units in the army is causing the crash, and I spent several hours finding who was responsible. Turns out it was my Wish.com Naruto. Not his existence in a general sense. In fact, I have a lot of retarded people in my army. They fight very well. The issue was that Mr. Uzumaki was trying to ride a horse, and the game didn't like that shit one bit, so it crashed 20 times in a row. Yet again, our greatest struggle in the zombie apocalypse is against our own mod pack. Anyway, upon politely revoking Naruto's license, we're back on track. After breaking through Helman's first response force, there was nothing to stop us from carving up his southern provinces and selling them to the French. We also deployed half a dozen ninjas throughout his territory to monitor his troop movements. But eventually the fun had to end after I came across what I describe as the Indigestible Wad, a collection of 8 or 9 undead armies traveling in one giant doom stack. This is a problem, and I have the solution. Earlier in the campaign, a sex criminal was covering us in his bodily fluids, and our solution was gun. God bless America. And now, when a giant horde of undead creatures are barreling down on us, our solution will be bigger gun. The Big Cannon Samurai are tier 3 ranged units with an absurd stat line. You may be wondering what's so big about these cannons, and I'll tell you. It's the projectiles. We're not shooting our enemies with bullets anymore. We're smoking them in the face with flaming dicks. Because each projectile is 12 inches long and hurts like hell. Bad Dragon would be proud. I tested these out in some battles against the undead, and it quickly became clear to me this shit is absolutely busted. Because not only does it do massive and accurate damage, but it doesn't even need a line of sight. So as long as you're within 200 range, you're dying. Random skeletons charging across a field? Try again. Senile dickhead flying through the sky? Back to the retirement home, Grandpa. And most importantly, cavalry charges now turn into cavalry stains on the ground. August 6, 1945, the United States of America did the Oppenheimer Shuffle on Hiroshima, and at that point, the war was over. But it took another 8 days for the Emperor to admit his defeat. With the invention of these big cannon samurai, that's exactly where we're at now. Emperor Helmo has virtually no counterplay, apart from praying that we run out of ammo. So we spent the next 15 turns obliterating all of his armies and strengthening our allies. By the time his faction went extinct, we controlled all of Southeast Asia through a series of French, Japanese, and Filipino puppet states. That's one zombie faction down, 3 to go. So let's check on the others and see how they're doing. Mannfred von Karstein once controlled the entirety of the Neo-Assyrian undead empire, but in what can only be described as a generational fumble, he somehow created 20 resistance factions which are now taking turns beating the fuck out of him. So we should probably go put him out of his suffering. On the other hand, Heinrich Kemmler has control over all of Ulthuan and most of Bretonnia, while Vlad von Karstein has a good chunk of the empire, placing them at strength rank 1 and 2. So what's the plan? Well, a reasonable man might just decide to make 10 full armies of big cannon samurai, but that's exorbitantly expensive, and our country hasn't yet figured out how to monetize gooning to anime women. So instead, we'll have to settle for some more affordable options. Army 1, 5,000 peasants. Army 2, 5,000 peasants. Army 3, people I actually care about. Army 4, 5,000 peasants with guns. Army 5, a collection of dangerous mythological creatures such as a woman. And finally, Army 6, the only cavalry I could recruit without crashing my game. This is our dream team. Now, let's go save the world. But how are we going to get all the way over here? Well, Warhammer is an excellent game, not just because it actively denies the existence of Australia, but because it believes in hybridized flat Earth theory, where the world is flat, but you can circumnavigate it only if you're in a boat and you're teleporting. The mechanics of it aren't clear to me either, but the point is we're using this sea lane to teleport from here all the way to South America. When we started this scenario, this continent was almost entirely controlled by a lesser zombie faction, but after 100 turns of resistance fighting, the people of South America have eliminated their undead overlords and replaced them with literal demons. Very cool, South America. Goodbye. Quickly ignoring that entire continent, we sail across the Atlantic to arrive on the shores of Mannfred's territory. Just when you thought the Middle East couldn't get any more complicated, 30,000 Japanese men stage an amphibious landing in Saudi Arabia. Our first order of business is to gain control of Sudenburg. The garrison of 3,000 men pissing their pants was no match, and with that we have a base of operations. Meanwhile, somewhere in the desert, Sheikh Mannfred von Karstein is punching the air at the thought of losing his capital to a bunch of impoverished rice farmers. So he issues a fatwa against our lives, and 6,000 of his most violent extremists show up to kill us. That was his biggest mistake, because prior to this moment he had plausible deniability about having a humiliation fetish, but after this fight, he's obviously getting off on it. Here's how it went. Our 4 armies against his 4. We can only use 2 at a time, so I choose my main samurai stack and the meme stack of big cannons. After some maneuvering, we establish a defensive shell, and anything that came near the shell got absolutely annihilated. Entire platoons of thousands of enemies gone in an instant. Food nourishes my body, books nourish my mind, and 19 big cannon gunners nourish my soul. Occasionally, Mannfred's cavalry might barely survive the gunners, at which point they charge headfirst into my spear wall. This is already a bad idea, but after I activate the spear quilt ability, my spearmen gain 600% mass, which means Mannfred is basically charging headfirst into a concrete wall. So that was the battle. 20 minutes of shooting everything that moved, and then 10 minutes of stabbing it with spears after it stopped moving. Final result: 250 friendly casualties, 3,500 enemy casualties. Eat shit, Mannfred. Mannfred participated in his next humiliation ritual at the Siege of the Great Pyramid, where he attempted to defend a castle using 90% cavalry. In case you're not familiar, that's like attempting to perform open-heart surgery with a Ford F-150. It's just not applicable. So obviously, we scaled the walls with riflemen and spent 30 minutes putting football-sized holes in all of his units. Not sure what he was expecting, but getting shot 1,200 times was kind of the high watermark of Mannfred's career, because after that, we just casually conquered the rest of his territory. This was boring, but it gave us a chance to forge alliances with Raponce and Volkanovsky the Grim, which helped bolster our income to a massive 15,000 gold per turn. And perhaps more importantly, our alliance with the Empire now allows us to recruit actually good artillery. With Mannfred decomposing in the sand and several new allies to control the region, we can move on to the second last undead lord, Heinrich Kemmler. About 20 turns ago, Heinrich was doing quite well for himself, controlling all of Ulthuan. But now we can see that not only did Morathi survive the zombie apocalypse, but she actually survived so well that she's invading Heinrich and winning. In fact, she did about half the work for us. So let's capitalize on this opportunity and take the other half of Ulthuan. Arriving there, we fan out and take a big bite out of that donut. Heinrich Kemmler does not respond well to this surprise rimming, and he attacks us at Cairn Thel. I deploy our gun cage in the shallow waters. This slows the enemies down as they charge at us, which gives us more time to shoot them in the face. Additionally, Shingen unlocked the Dark Skies ability, which is a map-wide effect that causes flocks of crows to attack all enemy flying units. This regularly kills bats and even Vargeists within 30 seconds, meaning we've got permanent air superiority. The battle started off quite well, with us melting 3 of his commanders right off the bat. However, once his army caught up, things began getting complicated. Defending a 360-degree formation is pretty challenging, especially when your rocket artillery keeps friendly firing your own units. But luckily, the undead leadership has a remarkable proclivity for flying headfirst into projectile oblivion, and when the enemy generals are speed-running their own death, it's almost impossible to lose. While our 2 main armies were taking care of that, we split a second battle group to proceed along the northern shores, capturing additional territory until we ran into the Red Duke of Mousillon. Not only is this man a vampire, but I have credible evidence linking him to a furry VTuber reaction channel, so he had to die. And let me tell you, when we ripped him apart using every Japanese monster on the roster, I felt emotionally enriched on multiple levels. Unfortunately, the undead are resilient, and for the next 20 turns, we had to deal with a continuous piss stream of Parisian vampires sailing across the channel to kill us. In better news, we liberated Lothern and brought Tyrion back to life. Then we started selling him 90% of our Ulthuan holdings, and for a man who was, until very recently, dead, he has a lot of money. Money which I desperately need, because Morathi is extorting us for 25,000 gold each turn. It's not that I'm a fan of financial domination, but the Dark Elves are so sexually deranged that even the most perverse Japanese salaryman would stand no chance against them. So it's easier to just cooperate with the sexual terrorists. By this point, we've taken all of Heinrich's settlements in Ulthuan, established the High Elves as a satellite state, and Morathi is teetering on the edge of flattening our dick with a pasta maker, which means it's time for us to leave. Next objective is Bretonia. Once we purge the undead from this region, then it's on to the Empire for our final target, Vlad von Karstein. Quickly working our way through a naval blockade, we stage our first invasive landing at Lyonesse. This is a massive city for the undead, so I'm expecting heavy resistance and possibly some suicide bombers. However, instead, as soon as we arrive, the enemy commander jumps in a boat and sails 500 miles away. I almost feel embarrassed to be at war with these people, but I'm not too embarrassed to farm their garrisons for XP, because now I'm able to give my commanders the Death Squad perk. Call my boys Unit 731, because Was they really out here committing racially motivated war crimes and experimenting on the locals? Speaking of human experimentation, I think something is deeply wrong with my ninjas. Too many chromosomes or not enough? I'm not sure, but every time I load the save, it gets worse. Willfully ignoring the uncontrolled mutation of my soldiers, we push forward, capturing several undead cities with minimal resistance. Heinrich did attempt to stop us at one point, but he chose to attack us on a map with a massive choke point when all of our units have rifles. So you can imagine how that went. I take a moment to appreciate Heinrich's situation. According to lore, this man spent 6 years living in the forest, eating tree bark and going insane before selling his soul to the devil to obtain necromantic powers. All of that just for some goofy Asians to show up T-posing on horses and dismantle his entire empire. Sorry, Heinrich, but I've already depicted you as the Virgin and me as the Chad, so you never stood a chance. The only real casualty of this war was my big cannon meme stack. I got a little too cocky in this battle and they all died. One of the saddest days in my life was when my child asked me to buy them a Skibbity Toilet mystery surprise toilet, at which point I had no choice but to abandon them outside a Walmart. But losing this army was even worse. Fortunately, fresh reinforcements just arrived from Japan. 14 tier 5 samurai at a cost of 8,000 gold per turn. If Heinrich wasn't doomed before, he definitely is now. So we spread out and violently expunge his presence from Bretonnia. Also, the dwarves seem to have performed an ethnic cleansing against the wood elves. Truly, the world is healing. In similarly pleasant news, Marathi appears to have extracted some sexual gratification from watching us repeatedly batter the elderly, and now she kind of likes us. Fellas, I think we've got a chance. All that's left is to seal the deal. I am a romantic soul, so to impress Marathi, I strike deep into the empire, capturing Heinrich's final settlement, leaving him with only one army, at which point I joined forces with her to spit roast Heinrich into oblivion. Used to be that buying a girl flowers was enough to impress her, but now apparently even fucking an old man to death in front of her isn't good enough, because not only did we not get her number, but she declared war on us immediately after. The dating economy may never recover. Now look, we're already saving the world from zombies. We don't have the resources to also save it from perverts, so it's time for some market manipulation. You see, my Bretonnian settlements are like a collection of investments, carefully managed and neatly arranged in a dossier. And in 2 or 3 turns, Marathi is going to take a big fat shit in that dossier, which means we have 2 or 3 turns to become financially liquid. So I start selling off all of our Bretonnian holdings to anyone with the money. Aquitaine, Karl Franz, even bearded children. Don't care? Here's your settlement, good luck defending it. Some people might consider this a form of insider trading, but I prefer to think of it as a timely exercise in geographical minimalism. That was a bit of a disaster, but we handled it well. Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, trouble is brewing. South Korea just declared war on us and staged an invasion of northern Japan. With all of our armies in the empire, this is pretty bad. As the Koreans captured more of our territory, I rushed to assemble an army, but all I could come up with was this: 7 tier 5 samurai against an entire army of dark elf degenerates. Truly, we are doomed. Or at least, that's what I thought, before I realized our samurai can run faster than a goddamn horse. Not only that, but they are completely psychologically unbreakable. So our fight against the Koreans was just a bunch of sociopathic Japanese guys going on an unprecedented killing spree and then chasing down the survivors like wild animals. This is a proud day for all of Japan. Shortly after that, we executed the South Korean president, and their territory was colonized by Mongolian lizards. I'm starting to understand why every Asian hates other Asians. In fact, at this point, our greatest threat is no longer the undead. It's the dozens of warmongering factions that have rushed into the power vacuum left by the undead. But we've got a goal to complete, and Vlad is still alive. Kind of. So let's get back to work. We begin pouring our armies into the Empire, splitting one group to the south and one to the north to capture as much as we can. We run into our first resistance at Averheim, when 4 undead armies attack us. However, they're attacking our stack of tier 5 samurai, so it turned into an absolute bloodbath. By the end, there was 5,000 corpses in this ditch alone. The good news is only 500 of those were ours, but the undead seem to have a near limitless supply of soldiers, and they're trying to wear us down. We can only win this if we fight them smarter, in advantageous maps such as this one. An open field bisected by a river, leaving 2 bottlenecks for us to utilize. We rush to gain control of them with our samurai, as 6,000 zombies descend upon us like the plague. I'd like to tell you we fought bravely and had some kind of Japanese Thermopylae, but all I can actually tell you is my game crashed 3 times. You see, our mod pack is like a Russian egg homunculus. It's a bastardization of genetic code that is born into this world, writhes around in agony for a few moments, and then dies painfully. And currently, we're getting close to the dying part, because with each passing turn, the game becomes massively less functional. So we need to finish this challenge before the mod deletes my operating system and hires a Bitcoin assassin to kill me. The issue we're facing right now is that Vlad seems to be turtling all of his armies in a doom stack at Averheim, and we're definitely not ready to kill that. Hypothetically, it is difficult to defeat Prime Ronnie Coleman in martial combat, but if we were to economically cripple him until he could no longer afford to feed himself, then it would become a lot easier, and we're going to adopt that same approach against Vlad. Instead of confronting him at Averheim, we're going to split up and capture the rest of his territory. This should drain his economy and force him to sell off some of his armies. Then, when he's weak and vulnerable, we strike. It took about 15 turns to take all of Vlad's territory and fully encircle him at Averheim. Every so often, he would lash out and send a few armies to fight us, but the samurai body is a well-oiled machine that turns dead people into chopped up dead people. Also, we've just sold his capital city to the dwarves for 200,000 gold, and we're closing in on 1 million. So we can do this all day. At this point, the Japanese noose is tightening around Vlad's neck, and just as I'm getting ready to pull, tragedy strikes. I try to end my turn on turn 206, and then the game clenches its fist, grabs at its chest, and collapses dead. Huh, that's a bit weird. Let's reload and try again. End turn 206, and crash. This shit ain't good. Every time we end turn 206, the game crashes without fail, but we're far too close to our goal to give up now. After a brief investigation, I realized every crash takes place when the game is processing the actions of the 7th faction, which happens to be our old friends, the Chinese. Which of course raises the question, what if China didn't exist? Maybe, just maybe, we wouldn't crash. So I downloaded a console command mod and got to work wiping 1.4 billion people off the face of the earth on a hunch. I'm not proud to admit that mass genocide was the first solution I went to, but it fucking worked. After making the Chinese extinct, I gave their territory to Balthazar Gelt and we passed on to turn 207 without a problem. Thank Christ. With the fabric of reality now patched up using the bodies of 1 billion Chinese, we can finally finish Vlad and end the apocalypse. I link our southern and northern army groups and drunk drive them straight into Vlad's doomstack. We get a massive 4-on-4 clash, which I could just auto-resolve. But where's the spectacle in that? We're fighting this one manually. Loading in with a pretty strong army, I get a bit cocky and charge straight across the field at our enemies. Predictably, this was a bad idea and things get pretty messy pretty fast. Our flanks aren't secure and the undead are starting to overwhelm us. But at the last moment, we receive a massive influx of reinforcements, which blitz across the field and begin massacring the undead. This is a highly contested battle, and then we just won. Don't worry about how, just know that we definitely didn't crash for the 500th time. With that battle over, Vlad's armies scatter and we take our time grouping up and beating the shit out of each of them individually. In fact, I have so many commanders in this province with the purification trait that we've completely removed all of the vampiric corruption in like 2 turns. So Vlad's remaining armies are now suffering attrition from being undead, being homeless, and some of them also have the plague. Now, as much as I'd love to sit here and watch his final army decompose, I can't risk our mod breaking and forcing another genocide. So I attacked Vlad's last army, kill it, and achieve absolution. After 200 turns and countless human sacrifices, the zombie apocalypse has been stopped, and Shingen Takeda is a hero. So what happens to all of our favorite characters now that the world has been saved? Well, Mr. Takeda retired back to Japan to continue his career in real estate, eventually causing the 2008 financial crisis and inventing the George Foreman grill to become a multi-millionaire. Marathi continued her world domination before eventually accidentally overdosing on Percocet in a Burger King washroom. The continent of South America continues its descent into chaos, with its average inhabitant being considered too dangerous for human contact. Tyrion and the High Elves renounce their titles and open the world's first gay auto body shop.
Lubed up buttholes. That's what my garage is all about.
The French are their #1 customers. And finally, 1.4 billion Chinese are still missing to this day. The world isn't perfect, but thanks to us, it's got a chance.